Welcome to the Book Show, a celebration of reading and writers. I'm Joe Donahue. Lydia Millet's previous novel, A Children's Bible, was a National Book Award finalist. The New York Times Book Review selected it for their 10 best books of 2020, and it was a national bestseller. Her new novel is Dinosaurs. As in Millet's other books, this story is very funny and yet deals with the important themes of extinction and climate change. Millet's deep interest in the natural world runs throughout her life, not just her fiction. She's won awards from Penn Center USA and the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Her story collection, Love in Infant Monkeys, was a Pulitzer Prize finalist. And it is a great pleasure to welcome Lydia Millet to this week's book show. How are you?
I am good. Thanks for having me on.
The last time you were on was for A Children's Bible, which I remember telling you at the time was such a special and wonderful book. Were you pleased to see how that was responded to?
I was delighted that so many people read it. I mean, any writer wants to be read, and for some reason that book got read a lot, and so yeah, of course, I was overjoyed by that.
Do you try to think of why that's the case? Like what it is about the book that struck that chord?
I have to think it was just luck and timing, because, there's so many great books that never seem to catch on with the reading public. And I don't think it's certainly not a meritocracy, and it's certainly not that they're just too difficult always or anything like that, or too esoteric. Just certain things fly under the radar, and then all of a sudden something gets seen and there's a blip, and it's a little bit mysterious to me. Sometimes it's just a matter of economics and marketing and stuff, but other times it really just seems serendipitous, doesn't it?
Absolutely. What brought you to this particular subject of what you're writing about in Dinosaurs?
First of all, I just wanted to, I wanted to write a book with fewer characters in it than a children's Bible, sort of like a simpler story and so I decided to write sort of the simplest construct I could think of, which was a person looking out of his house into another house that was sort of opened up like a dollhouse, or like spotlit like a stage with a few people moving around on it. And so that was sort of the origin of this. Just how can I write a simple story with just a few characters, but that has some deep ties inside it? And then I had the idea, I just stole the idea of Gil walking across the country and on this long walk from my boyfriend doing a similar thing, although his walk was on, a hiking trail, the Appalachian Trail, which is mentioned in the book. But he walked that whole thing. It took him like 4 or 5 months as Gil walks across the country. Peripatetically, at the beginning of the book, it's not a huge sort of focus of the narrative time. But I was kind of inspired by Aaron's long walk to give Gil a long walk too, between his lives, changing from one life that he had as he starts out in New York to the other life that he has later in the present time of the book in Arizona.
That idea that the house where Gil settles in Arizona overlooks this glass wall, a big stage. I mean, you do think Rear Window. This isn't Rear Window, but it has that vibe.
Right. It's not quite as ominous. But various readers have said to me that and I don't know if this was your experience of the book, but that they felt this sort of unfired gun lying around in the room, or that there was this sense of tension as they began the book, that something might or had to have to happen that was in some way threatening, but that things didn't turn out the way they expected. So it doesn't have the vibe, as you say, of Hitchcock, but it has that sort of voyeurism, which in Hitchcock's time, I think voyeurism did exist. In our time, I think that it's so mainstream that it no longer exists as a criminal act or a perversion. Essentially, the way we live is to live as voyeurs. We watch each other everywhere. We are watched everywhere. We put ourselves on display. We insist that others put themselves on display. we've become this whole nation of watchers whose watching is such a first principle of contemporary life that we don't even have the category of voyeurism anymore, really.
I love your explanation of people thinking that you had put unloaded guns around the novel. And because I wondered about that, that was a question I had for you, if that was intentional or not, to have that sort of lurking in the back of the mind of the reader.
Well, I do like suspense in novels, which isn't to say that I'm looking for the particular kind of suspense that is associated with the genre, but just narrative tension and suspense in the sense of a held breath or a sort of anticipation or a not knowingness going into the story. And so I think there is that here. It's not precisely structured as a thriller or anything like that. It's not a thriller. Like I did a book once that was sort of a hybrid thriller,
Mm-hmm.
Sweet Lamb of Heaven, but I'm not generally oriented in the direction of thrillers. But I did want there to be some sort of feeling of bristling, I don't know, awareness or something that could also be like sensitivity in this, if that makes any sense.
As you mentioned, it does. As you mentioned, Gil is the main focus of the novel is not getting from New York to Arizona. He gets there fairly quickly in the novel, but he's reeling from a breakup. It's an unexpected breakup. And from there, what did you want to explore with this character and the few other characters that you have him relate to?
Well, I just wanted to write about someone who seemed to have everything economically because he's rich, and who still was chronically sort of lonely and feeling inadequate and somehow bereft, like always sort of feeling lost and looking for something to be a part of, because I don't know. I think I was just in the mood to write a sort of wish fulfillment fantasy of company. I was revising this during lockdown, and I don't actually know my own neighbors, but I have had people in my life that act sort of like the next door neighbor woman artist acts toward Gil, which is like to welcome him and to really sort of persuade him, like to seduce him, although not like sexually, but like persuade him to be sort of part of the life of their family. And I have had people who just were determined to befriend me in my own life, and it's such a form of grace and so lovely when that happens to you. So I think for this book, I sort of put that wish fulfillment of neighborliness that I was feeling at the time, and also the grace that can come from people suddenly just for no reason that you necessarily understand, deciding that they want you to be their friend.
You let us know this at the end of the novel, but it is, I mean, it makes sense, obviously, that as this character is walking from New York to Arizona, one of the things the character learns is about how to be alone and trying to figure that out, and what is the level of loneliness and what is the level of isolation, which I think we were all thinking about during the pandemic.
Yeah, and what is the difference between being alone and loneliness, and loneliness and solitude? All these different sort of shadings of solitariness. They feel different, right? Loneliness is not the same as being alone. So I wanted to have him kind of experiencing one and having experienced another after his relationship dissolved. Sort of what kinds of aloneness are okay for us, and what sorts make us melancholy.
Lydia Millet is the author of Dinosaurs, a novel. It is published by Norton. I hope you take this in the spirit in which it's intended, because I say it as a compliment, but this is a beautiful book where not a lot happens.
Yeah, event has not, it's never been what mainly interested me in writing or reading fiction, But I have had, in my past few books, a lot has happened. There's been plenty of event. It's just not what I write for. I really write for character and feeling and ideas, and so I decided to make. I set out to make this be a kind of quiet, warm, sort of a book that feels like company without being tumultuous or without having sort of cascades of plot occurrences. I just wanted to do a simple thing that was sort of vibrant with a kind of feeling.
One of the ways that a tone is set is through the chapters and the chapter headings, which are often birds, ravens, vultures. The way that it is broken up, I found to be fascinating because it does make sense as you're reading that particular part of whether it's about a quail will sort of come into the story, or as I said, a hawk or screech.
Yeah, I mean, this started out being called Men of Birds, this book. And I renamed it Dinosaurs along the way because it seemed to me that Men of Birds was perhaps less than inspiring. I don't know. It made me think of like St. Francis or something, and it's not about St. Francis, really. Gil's relationship to the birds that he sees in his yard is one that I heard a lot of people talking about actually especially during the first, I don't know, half year of the pandemic. People were observing. Of course, there was a phenomenon of wildlife being sighted in cities where they normally weren't present, or there was all that. But there was just also the thing of people looking out their windows and into their gardens and having time to notice creatures they hadn't made any time for before. And that sort of overlapped with our thinking that there was somehow more wildlife entering human spaces. And so there was this sort of discussion about whether are we just noticing them more, or are there more of them in the places where we live? And I think, it depended on the case what the answer was. But a lot of people became more interested in birds over the course of the pandemic. And I grew up just sort of, I liked birds fine. I thought they were cool, but I was sort of bored by them. No, they were sort of boring. They were just like flit, 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 yawn, But the older I've gotten, and I don't consider myself ancient yet, but I'm definitely middle aged. I just now think they're just remarkable and perfect evidence or examples of design, sort of, which I don't mean intelligent design, but just like this beautiful evolutionary design that makes them so extraordinary. I mean, some of these creatures can, fly 8,000 miles without eating. It's just ridiculous, right? Like it's quite sublime. Anyway, so Gil becomes, where he used to be an urban person, just uninterested in this kind of world. He becomes invested in these beautiful small creatures that are around him.
Well, he becomes invested enough to defend them, to become a defender of them.
Yeah, with some hesitation, because he's really ambivalent about sort of intervening. He's not aggressive. He just sort of occupies this space of sort of ambivalence around action and stuff in his life. He has tended to be passive, and so it's quite a strange thing for him to feel propelled to intervene. But finally, he finds a way to do that.
Give us a sense of the neighbors, because the neighbors play a large role here, and you think to yourself, well, we really have a story because he basically likes the neighbors, right? They're good neighbors.
Yeah, I mean, he has lovely neighbors who are oddly in sympathy with him, who sort of are not only friendly, but with whom he shares certain aesthetics and pieces of language and taste. And so they really become a family that he hasn't had. So, it's a simple idea, but, it's not that simple for it to happen in real life. And so he just has this great good luck after living a life that really wasn't rich with intimate relationships. He suddenly has that. And I don't know, I kind of wanted to live in what that might feel like.
It seems like he is getting used to it, but even the neighbors are getting used to it of having someone there who can sort of look in literally and not mind that all that much.
Yeah, there's a kind of generosity, I think, both ways, both from Artis and her husband Ted to him, and the other way around, because he becomes really fond of their younger kid, a little boy that he spends a lot of time trying to, I don't know, babysit or mentor or something. At the time that I wrote it, my own son was the same age as that character, so it was a kind of another form of wish fulfillment, kind of stepfather fantasy, I guess, on my part.
Well, and to mentor, but also to seem to protect in a way, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's actually a lot that Tom and Gil have in common, because they're both sort of starting to step out into the world more than they have in the past, even though some 30 years separates them.
As you mentioned at the beginning, you wanted this to be a novel with a few characters, so we're getting to most of them. But one of the characters that I really enjoyed is Sarah. Give us a sense of where that character comes from and the role that you wanted Sarah to play within the novel.
Oh, that's a good question. It happened to me that after I had been divorced for quite a few years, I met again someone I'd known when I was young. And I've had other friends who have done this too, actually, just like saw someone with new eyes, sort of, that had been missing from my life for a long time. And I don't know, it reminded me how instantly people can feel familiar or become familiar again, even over, like, across decades of absence. And even though that's sort of not the setup with Sarah and Gil, there was this kind of familiarity, this sort of instant understanding between them that there had been to some degree also with him and Artis. And Sarah is Artis's friend, and for those who haven't read the book yet, and who Gil starts to see. But like Artis, she's sort of determined to draw him into her sphere. I liked that there would be this strong person that he could be in a relationship who wasn't cruel to him in the way that his former partner had been.
There is one page in the book toward the end where Gil just lays it out as to his background. And this has been alluded to throughout the novel, and you get a sense of much of it. But the full biography, and I think that's even what he refers to it as, his biography, that comes out, and it fills in so much and ultimately lets you know why this is someone who is really searching, but is also looking for something that he never had in his past at all.
Yeah, yeah. No, it is a kind of thumbnail sketch that he offers of his history that we haven't seen before, before in all its parts. But he's someone who sort of he grew up in the solitude in which he lived as an adult, and he didn't really know anything else. And even when he, for a long time, did have a partner as a grown up, he still didn't sort of know how to not be alone, even within that relationship. He didn't know sort of what real company was, right? Is the idea. He didn't know what to expect from affection.
The birds, the aforementioned birds that make up the skeleton, if you will, of the novel, and yet it is called Dinosaurs, and you make that connection between the birds and dinosaurs, and I'm interested in well, that connection, but more so of how you came to it, and that it really became the idea for the whole novel.
Well, I think that dinosaurs and birds are their relationship between each other, and our relationship with them both is kind of unique, because of course dinosaurs as such are these extinct beings that we're quite interested in and quite fixated on, play with when we're children in the form of toys, and then grow up and look at in museums and and study. And so we're rightfully obsessed with these long extinct animals that we have never coincided with on Earth as human beings. And yet at the same time, we live with the descendants of these animals who are not extinct. The descendants of the avian dinosaurs, right? Who didn't go extinct, and they are sort of commonplace and real for us. And I mean, some are quite rare and extraordinary, and David Attenborough talks about them on his program, but some are just in our backyards and all around
Right.
us, and just part of the fabric of life. And yet they are what remain of the dinosaurs, right? For us, even so, we have this. There's a thing with the birds of extinction and presence, sort of both at the same time, that I think is quite fascinating, kind of like existentially, and as a matter of our
Mm.
relationship to them and feeling, and just the combination of oddness that we see in a bird, like alienness almost, and dailiness and mundaneness, and taking for grantedness, if you will.
And you read this at a time where we are a divided country, and we talked about the loneliness and being alone, and how far that brings us from and how close that brings us to extinction.
Yeah. And this book was set during the 4 years that Trump was president, and there's not much sort of direct reference to that in there, partly because it sort of was in there and I took it out because it would have given it such a short shelf life, I think, the novel. But there is certainly a feeling of that there's a certain sort of oppressiveness that exists in the neighborhood and beyond the neighborhood, sort of either seen or unseen force of some kind of hostile or kind of like othering sort of politics that lurks behind and contributes to the isolation of some of these made up people.
You bring us basically from the election of 2016 to the midterms, and Gil basically says something like, "I assume that the nice, competent lady would win, and that didn't happen."
Right, as he's walking across the country. Yeah.
Right. And that not happening really changes so much. And as you said, it's not a central point of the novel, but it certainly is under that. A lot is changing during these 2 years, not just for Gil, but for everyone else.
Yeah, the sort of like just backdrop of, I don't know, like bewildered sort of alienation was sort of particular to that era, to those, especially the first 2 years.
Gil just seems like such a nice guy.
I mean, they do exist, as you know. He's, I will say, like, I've written a fair number of novels and short stories, and in a couple of them, well, no, not a couple, in many of them, I really have sort of vilified exactly the kind of demographics category that Gil is part of. He's a rich white guy, heterosexual. He's every sort of form of privilege, and I've delighted in the past in really mocking those sorts of characters, as you probably recall.
Yes.
But sometimes you just have to do something a bit different, and some of some of the people who surprised me the most in my life are people who you didn't expect to come from what they came from. That is, like one of my oldest friends just grew up really surrounded by hostels, and against all odds became this like voracious reader and listener of music. And even though everyone he grew up with was hostile, sort of to learning and to all the things that go into books and music, And so I like it when people are unexpected, or when books are unexpected in a series of books. I can't really do the same exact thing again and again. So this Gil character, yes, he's privileged and he's all that, but he's just also a guy who finds himself in a situation and is, like so many of us, not really grateful for his particular situation, no matter how privileged it is. He still people of all stripes find reasons to be miserable in their lives or to be lonely in their lives. He just happens to be one of them, and he really didn't have much love growing up, and so in that way he has always lacked privilege, the basic, most fundamental privilege, of humankind, which is social life and love.
And he has this horrible thing happen in his childhood. At one point, he can get back at the person responsible, and yet chooses not to. And because it's almost as if, okay, there's just been enough. There's been enough of the damage that has been done.
Yeah, I don't think the vengeance paradigm has really served our society well. It doesn't really work as the basis of social transactions. When we throw people in prison, they don't tend to come out and save the world afterward. We just don't. We don't. Our sort of crime and punishment models don't work very well at all and are deeply unjust and so forth. So, yeah, he's someone who's not interested in retribution. He's not perfectly benevolent or anything, and
Sure.
he doesn't particularly like this person who caused his parents' deaths. He also is not. Yeah, he's not moved to act against him either. And I don't really relate to vengefulness. It's not really part of my profile.
Well, the name of the new book is Dinosaurs. It is published by Norton. Lydia Millet, thank you so much for being with us. Delight to speak with you and a delight to read the new novel. I thank you so much for sharing with us.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for reading the book.
We enjoy hearing from our listeners about our shows. You can email us at book@wamc.org. You can listen again to this or find past book shows via podcast or at wamc.org. Sarah LeDuc produces our program. Bookmark us for next.